in Silicon Valley, we don't know what the hell we're doing. I think what Silicon Valley does, though, is we know how to declare victory better than the Japanese. The way Silicon Valley works is you throw a lot of things up against the wall, a very small amount of it sticks. Then you go up to the wall and you paint the bullseye around what's stuck and you say, I knew exactly what I was doing. I was aiming for that bullseye and I hit it. Well, you can always hit the bullseye if you paint the target after. I had to catch the bus to school and bus home. And twice in my life at Iolani, I was robbed on the bus. And I said to myself, God, you have got to study. You have got to work hard so you live someplace where you don't get robbed and you don't have to catch a bus.
What is your ikigai?
Oh.
Today on the Coral Capital podcast, we have Guy Kawasaki, Chief Evangelist of Canva and the marketing legend who helped launch the original Macintosh at Apple back in 1984. Guy has authored 16 books, including the modern classic The Art of the Start and his newest title, Think Remarkable. He also hosts the widely acclaimed Remarkable People podcast. In this episode, he shares stories from his time at Apple under Steve Jobs, a few surprising predictions for where tech is headed next, and his unmistakable blend of humor and hard truth you won't hear anywhere else. Enjoy the episode. Guy Kawasaki, welcome to the Coral Capital podcast. I'm so excited to be able to chat with you today. Mahalo for joining us.
I didn't know you speak Hawaiian and English and Japanese.
I actually grew up in Hawaii.
Oh, you did?
I did, yeah. I went to Waikiki Elementary School as well as a couple other public schools. But
did you go to high school there?
I did not. I was back in Japan for high school.
So Waikiki Elementary is a school right across the street from the Honolulu Zoo, right?
Exactly, yeah. Very close to Diamond Head and the Honolulu Zoo.
That's a nice place to go.
It is, definitely. I had a very, very good childhood, I think, growing up in a island, not just surrounded by nature, but I feel like the people there are so warm. It gives you like a different outlook on life, I feel like.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yes.
So anyways, I would love for our audience to better understand you as a person before we get into your career and all of that. Like we were just talking about, I know you're Japanese American and grew up in Hawaii, so we're both similar in that sense. Can you share a little bit about your childhood and your upbringing?
Sure. So the fact that you went to Waikiki Elementary means that you lived on the good side of town. I lived on the bad side of town. I went to Kalihi Elementary, and Kalihi Valley is, shall I say, not exactly Diamond Head. So I came from a lower middle income family and a very diverse area. And it's not like I had an oppressively poor, poverty-stricken upbringing. I never thought I was poor. It's not like I was hungry or I didn't have clothes or slippers or anything. And luckily for me, an elementary school teacher convinced my parents that I had enough potential to go to college. And so I should get into the private school system in Hawaii so that I could apply to college. And thank you, God, my parents listened to her. I got out of the public school system. I went to a school near Waikiki Elementary called Iolani. And from Iolani, I went to Stanford. And Stanford, that was kind of the turning point of my life there. So that's my life in a nutshell.
Now, I know when you went to Stanford and then graduated, you didn't necessarily join Apple straight off the bat, right? Your initial career wasn't necessarily linear. What was that kind of of your life?
My initial career was the antithesis of linear because, well, you're Asian American, so you can probably relate to this. So this is back in the 70s, which you probably weren't born yet. But anyway, so back in the 70s, if you're Asian American, your parents wanted you to be a doctor, dentist, or lawyer. And when I was at Stanford, I took this pre-med course where you walked around Stanford Medical Center on rounds, and I fainted. So I figured, guy, you're not cut out to be a doctor. And then I read that dentists have the highest statistics for suicides. I figured, guy, you don't want to be a dentist. And in the meantime, my father was a state senator in Hawaii, and he really wanted me to have a law degree. So I went to law school. And I lasted 2 weeks and I quit law school. I went back to Hawaii. I worked. I went back to the mainland to go to UCLA for an MBA. And that's the second big turning point in my life. So, yes, so I did not join Apple straight after college or anything. I dropped out of law school. I got an MBA. And then I went to work for a fine jewelry manufacturer. So we made jewelry that we sold to retailers. And that was one of the most valuable experiences in my life because I learned how to sell in that business. And if you really think about it, everybody has to be able to sell. I mean, not necessarily in the sense of, commission sales or real estate brokers, but selling means you're convincing people, to do something. And that could be the person checking you in at the airlines to give you a upgrade to first class. It could be a job opportunity interview. It could be a raise, getting seated right away at a restaurant. It could be asking your wife, if you can go on a surfing trip. I mean, you're always selling.
Right. The art of negotiation. I feel like it applies in every aspect of life.
It sure does.
Would you say that you identify more as Japanese, American? Would you say you're like a local Hawaiian? How do you identify as a person?
I identify as Japanese American, especially these days, especially because I've become more and more aware of what happened during World War II when the Japanese Americans were interned. And I think we have a government right now that, may intern or deport people that are not exactly like them. And so this is, Japanese internment version 2. So I identify that way, but I identify as Hawaiian, or not necessarily genetically Hawaiian, but from Hawaii in the sense of the Ohana spirit, which is a Hawaiian word for family, but it's family that is not necessarily simply genetic relationships. It is, your aunties and your uncles and, people who care about you, your teachers, your coaches. So there's the concept of Ohana, the extended family. There's also the concept of aloha, which is, to be welcoming and kind and generous and, whatever, all that good stuff that Hawaii stands for.
Yeah, I feel like, especially in the tech and even like startup industry, it lacks a lot of like Japanese American representation. I mean, there's not a ton of us, anyways, perhaps that's why. And I don't think it's necessarily like super common for people from Hawaii to end up in the Bay Area or to be in the tech scene, right?
No.
So it's great to have people like you.
The reason that happened, I may have to burst a few bubbles for you. So, when you ask people who are successful, what motivated you as a young kid? What did you want to do? Many of these people say, I wanted to end poverty. I wanted to make the world a better place. I wanted to ensure clean water for everybody. I wanted to be Greta Thunberg. Let me tell you my stories. So I went to Iolani, but I lived in Kalihi Valley, which is the opposite end of town. And so I had to catch the bus to school and bus home. And twice in my life at Iolani, I was robbed on the bus. And I said to myself, Guy, you have got to study. You have got to work hard so you live someplace where you don't get robbed and you don't have to catch a bus. Now, the next thing that happened is a family friend had a Porsche 911, and he gave me a ride in that Porsche once. And I got out of that car and I said, Guy, this is why you need to study and work hard. So in short, I cannot claim that I wanted to change the world. I just wanted to change the car. And so the lesson that I take from this is that what's important is that you are motivated to study hard and to work hard and to, persevere and use grit. It doesn't matter why you got that attitude or what motivated you, as long as you are motivated. And I bet you if you ask many, many successful entrepreneurs and they were honest, they would have answers closer to mine than the kind of answers that, PR firms invent for you after the fact.
No, I noticed that too. I feel like motivations change over time too, right? So people's journeys also change. But going back to your career, you had a very interesting initial insight into Apple. Back then when you joined, I think it was 1983.
Yeah.
It was already a fairly big company, but it's not like what we know Apple to be today, right? How would you describe your experience working there?
You implied that I, had some kind of brilliant insight or vision about what Apple could be. And, I made this really rational decision to bet on this horse, and this horse happened to win. Nothing could be further from the truth, because the reason I went to work for Apple is because I fell in love with the Apple II and I loved Apple II. And now you have to take yourself back to the 1970s and 1980s. If you were a college student back then and you had to write term papers, you either hired a typist or you bought the kind of paper that you could use a pencil eraser, or you use whiteout. And if you were really cool, you had an IBM Selectric typewriter with white backspacing. Okay. So in that world, when you see a word processor for the first time and you say, oh my God, there's no more erasing, there's no more backspacing and typing over with the white stuff. You can just change everything and, you have it online. You can spit off copies anytime you want. I fell in love with word processing. And so the reason why I joined Apple is that I love the technology. And when I saw Mac Paint and Mac Write for the first time, there were religious experiences, because Mac Paint enabled you to create graphics and Mac Write enabled you to integrate those graphics into the word processing with multiple fonts, multiple styles, multiple sizes, WYSIWYG printing. And so it was really just amazing love at first sight. Now, the other thing you should know about how I got into Apple is it's because of a Stanford classmate. And it was pure nepotism that got me into Apple. Because if you looked at my background, I didn't have any courses in computers or programming. I never worked for, not for a long time, in a tech company that would say, oh, it makes sense that he went from this tech company to Apple. On paper, there's no reason to hire me at Apple for my first job. And I'm telling you quite modestly and honestly, the only reason why I got a job at Apple is because of nepotism. So the second lesson I want to pass on to you is that it doesn't matter how you got your foot in the door. What matters is what you do once you are in the door.
Definitely. But I do have to say, if I have my research correct, I believe Mike Borch called you not once, but twice for two different roles at Apple, right?
Yeah.
He must have seen something in you, though, for him to be like, no, you got to come back and join this company, right?
Yeah. I mean, but from the very first time I saw Macintosh, I fell in love. It was really, the only thing I could say that was as impactful a first use of a product is Chat GPT. The same reaction I had to Mac Write and Mac Paint. Well, I would say Mac Write and Mac Paint, the first time I saw Google, because the first time you saw Google, it was nothing but a little text box on a big page. There was nothing around it. And you typed in something and it brought back all these links to articles about it. And it was pure magic. So it's Mac Paint, Mac Write, Google, and Chat GPT.
Yeah, the ChatGPT graph of user acquisition, you can just tell how it delivered such a magical moment for consumers.
Yeah, yeah.
And I definitely want to get into the topic of AI because I know you're very passionate and pro AI. But before that, I also wanted to ask for some of our operators out there. When you joined Apple, I would assume that the initial mission at that stage of the company was to kind of build initial awareness and that first community. And then when you went back, perhaps you were at a place where you were trying to reignite like the Mac cult and kind of bring back as well as scale the community. I would think those two things are a little bit different, but what was your approach? Do you have any advice as to how those processes were different?
Well, so the first time I worked for Apple, my job was to be a software evangelist. Evangelist comes from a Greek word meaning bringing the good news. So I was bringing the good news about Macintosh software development to software companies. And that was my initial position. The second time I came back, I was Apple's chief evangelist. So that is beyond just software developers, but just the community in general. So my first time was a narrow focus to get Macintosh software. My second time was not to exactly reignite the Macintosh cult. It was to preserve the cult that was already there. It had not died. I just kept it alive. And the lesson there is that if you make something really great, people are going to believe come hell or high water. And they did. And that's why Apple is here.
I'm sure in that role, you worked on a number of things. Is there one thing that you think worked really well while you were there? Because I know during that time, I don't know if you were actually a core part of it, but there was the Super Bowl commercial, there was competition with IBM. So I know that was also going on internally. I'm just curious, as a chief evangelist or as a software evangelist, how do you know if something's working? And is there like a magic moment where you're like, wow, we did X, Y, and Z, and clearly it's working?
Working for Steve Jobs was a magic moment every day. it was a very scary magic moment, but there were magic moments all the time. And I think that, it was pretty obvious when you showed a Macintosh to a software company or, your friends and family. When they first used MacWrite or MacPaint, you could see in their eyes it was magic. It was pure magic. And so that was very reassuring that, it wasn't just you hallucinating, that other people saw the magic too. Second time, one of the most useful things I did was I created a newsletter called Evangelist. Now, there's a technical product called a list server. And a list server is where people subscribe. It's kind of like Substack, at the very beginning where you subscribe to this voluntarily. And then you get mailings whenever the owner of the Substack or the owner of the list server sends stuff out. And so I use this pun on evangelist to call it evangelist, as in list server. And at the time that I worked there, the second time, mainstream media was kind of very negative on Apple, that Apple was going to die, Apple couldn't succeed, Windows was too powerful, Microsoft was too good, blah, blah, blah. And there was nothing but bad news about Apple. So Evangelist was nothing but good news about Apple, so that the true believers had something to look forward to. Like right now, there are websites and there are newsletters where they focus only on the positive and good stuff, because they figure there's so many places you can get bad stuff and negative stuff. They're going to be different and only publish good stuff. That's what I did. So.
Very interesting. I feel like it's always difficult. As an investor, we call ourselves the ecosystem VC. So we do a lot of work in trying to empower people to start companies and to, take risk here in Japan. But keeping that kind of fire going and that community going is also a lot of work. So, yeah, very impressive what you were able to achieve.
How many people are in your portfolio? How many companies are in your portfolio?
We have around 120, and we're a
Wow.
pretty lean team. So
How big is your fund?
our fund is 60 billion yen. So I would say around like $500 million
Wow.
in terms of AUM. Sorry, in terms of AUM.
Do you ever do a choral, world or choral conference or choral, something like that, or you bring in your portfolio?
So one of our big conferences is called Startup Aquarium, and that's actually the largest startup career fair in Japan. So it's actually an event where all of our portfolio companies pitch, not to investors, but to people who want to join a startup. And in Japan, as you might know, the culture is a little bit more risk averse. So people are still a little bit more comfortable joining big tech companies or these more traditional consulting firms. So we try to help educate, people about, the pros of joining a startup. Like, how does the stock option work?
When is this conference?
It's every March. So we'll be doing it again next year. We had about 2,500 people join our last one. So,
March 2026, you should bring me in for that.
oh my goodness, we will. Honestly, please let us extend your invite.
I would love to come to Japan to talk to these people.
Yes, I will actually follow up on that. Okay, so I also wanted to ask on the topic of Japan. I know Canva is big in Japan. You're obviously the chief evangelist there. I believe in Japan, Canva has been growing about 2x year over year. So the user base, the community has been growing. When you're thinking about evangelism and marketing cross border, how does that work? Perhaps in the context of Japan as an example, I don't know how involved you are there, but just curious to hear like how it works cross border.
Honestly, I'm not that involved with cross-border stuff, but I will tell you that I think there are certain concepts and certain abilities that just cross cultural norms, right? That, I think, I cannot build a case why, people in this culture want something really hard to use, and people in this culture want something really expensive, and people in this culture want something really centrally controlled. But then there are other cultures that want something easy to use and really cool and really decentralized control. And I kind of think that it's kind of a universal concept that, wouldn't you like to be a better communicator? Would you not like to have to wait for a designer to do your designs for you? Would you like to be able to choose from thousands of possibilities and customize it faster than you can boot Adobe Photoshop? I think that translates to every culture and every language.
So I guess the evangelism and marketing component of it is important too. But essentially, if the product is great, it makes that process much easier, is what it sounds like. Like if it's built correctly and if it's if someone in the US wants it, probably someone in Japan wants it as well, right?
Well, if it's bullcrap, it's very hard to be an evangelist, because evangelism comes from a Greek word that means bringing the good news. So if you don't have good news, it's hard to be an evangelist for it.
Right. I'm sure evangelism and marketing looks very different today than how it looked when you worked, with the Macintosh, as well as when you started with Canva in 2014. Is, things like social media, the way communities being built. What does evangelism look like today?
I think evangelism is very different. When I was evangelizing Macintosh to software companies, if you were really cool, you had a fax machine. If you were really, really cool, you had a cell phone in your car. The cell phone in your car was a 25-pound brick in your trunk, and there was a cable that connected to the front of your car, and you had this like cell phone that was about this big. And so, when you wanted to evangelize people, they either had to fly to you or you had to fly to them. And I don't think that's true anymore. That, between virtual conferencing and between all these digital methods, including social media, it's much easier to be an evangelist. Having said that, it's much easier for everybody to be an evangelist. So there's much more noise, which is kind of a microcosm of entrepreneurship, because it's a lot easier and cheaper to start a company today. That's the good news. The bad news is it's a lot easier and cheaper to start a company today. So that's why there's so many more companies starting.
Are there companies that you can think about today that you think do marketing and evangelism well? Like, what deserves Guy's golden touch?
That's a little arrogant to say what deserves Guy's golden touch.
In your opinion.
I would say that a product that excites me, that I think has a place in the world, that could really help preserve democracy and preserve peace and trade and, all the good stuff, women's rights, LGBTQ plus rights, all these good things, voter rights. The product is Signal. I think Signal is an essential product for the survival of the world. That Signal offers very good end-to-end and metadata encryption, automatic disappearing messages. It's very well done, and I think that it is the best and most secure and most private way to communicate. Do you use Signal?
I do not. I'm aware of them, but I do not use them.
Well, you live in Japan, so you don't need to worry about it, maybe.
Maybe I'll check them out, though. One of your big projects that you've been working on is the Remarkable People podcast. I think you've had over 250 amazing individuals on that podcast. And this probably ties into your new book, Think Remarkable. But amongst all those people that you have interviewed, what is the common characteristics or patterns that you see?
Well, I think, and this is how I organize the book, that remarkable people, first of all, have a growth mindset. And a growth mindset means that you can learn new things, you can do new things, you can take risks, you can grow. The second thing is they have a grit attitude. A grit attitude means that if you have a growth mindset and you try new things, you're not going to be good at them initially. So you have to keep at it. And this is something, of all cultures, I would think the Japanese understand, because, I'm going off a stereotype here, but, when you go to work for a sushi bar in the first 7 years, you're just washing the bowls. Take some perseverance to want to be a sushi chef. You don't just, after 1 week, you're a sushi chef. So that takes grit. And then the final component is grace, that at the end of your career, you realize that it is not about you anymore. It's about helping others and helping the next generation. So I would say that remarkable people have a growth mindset, a grit mindset, and a grace mindset.
Mm. On the topic of grit, you mentioned Japanese people. And I think it's true, even as an investor here, that there is a lot of perception about Japan being more risk averse. I was just talking about how people tend to work at bigger corporations. Perhaps starting a company doesn't necessarily come as naturally, just the way that the society has been structured compared to what you see in the US. How does someone know, like, when you should be continuing to persevere and when you should, stop and say, hey, look, this isn't working. Let me, shut down this company. Let me change this career path. What's the balance there?
I think this is one of those kind of things that you can only look backwards and say, yeah, I was right to do that. At the time you have to make a decision, it's very difficult to know. And, if you look at management books, half the management books say you need to persevere and never give up. The other half of management book says you need to pivot and break things quickly, right? So which one do you do? Those are absolute opposites. And I don't think there is a right answer. In a sense, that's what defines entrepreneurship. And I'll tell you something. I don't want people in Japan to think that in Silicon Valley, we know what the hell we're doing. We don't know what the hell we're doing. We don't know any better than anybody else. I think what Silicon Valley does, though, is we know how to declare victory better than the Japanese.
What do you mean by that? I'm curious.
If you start a company to do one thing and it ends up doing another, you say, yeah, of course, we knew exactly what we're doing. We always wanted to do a search engine and we were never going to be a consulting firm. But at the time you had no idea what the hell you're going to be. So we know how to declare victory. The way Silicon Valley works is you throw a lot of things up against the wall, a very small amount of it sticks. Then you go up to the wall and you paint the bullseye around what's stuck and you say, I hit the bullseye. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was aiming for that bullseye and I hit it. Well, you can always hit the bullseye if you paint the target after you see what's stuck to the wall. And if you're outside of Silicon Valley, you might think we're smarter and more visionary and blah, blah, blah. I would debate that all day long.
Interesting. I do definitely think that in both good and bad ways, people in America or just the education system is different. I think you're taught to be great storytellers. You're taught to be confident. And I think that translates perhaps to a lot of what you were saying about, people talking about the success in a very good light.
Maybe you shouldn't bring me to Japan because my theories are so contrary.
When we're talking about growth, grit, and grace, let's say someone wants to use entrepreneurship as a tool to become a remarkable person or to, have impact on the world. How do you think that framework might specifically apply to founders?
Let me put it this way. I don't think that the people on my podcast who are remarkable, I don't think they ever sat down and said, I think I'll try to be remarkable. So what should I do? Should I write a white paper? Should I, write a book? Should I start a podcast? Should I have a TikTok channel? What should I do to position myself as remarkable? I don't think it's like that at all. I think they fall in love with an idea, whether you're Jane Goodall and it's research on chimpanzees, or it's Neil deGrasse Tyson on astrophysics, or Stephen Wolfram on mathematics, or, whatever it is. And so you are driven by an obsession to do something great. And if you do something great, then people will consider you remarkable. So the goal is not to be considered remarkable. That's a natural byproduct. The goal is to do something great. And if you do something great, people will think you're remarkable. So the thing is to focus on making a remarkable product or service or idea or organization, and everything else falls into place.
Do you think doing what you love is a requirement? Perhaps requirement is too strong of a word, but a requirement to have that kind of impact?
That's a tricky question because there are going to be moments whenever you do anything, which comes back to grit, where you're going to absolutely hate what you do. There are moments I hate what I have to do for podcasting. I give you, I have to read about 50 something books a year in order to prepare myself for these interviews, right? And some of these books are so poorly written and formatted, I just want to throw up when I do that. But you got to do that, right? And so there was a guest named Mark Manson on my podcast, and he gave me a brilliant insight. He said, you know what? You have found what you love to do when it involves a shit sandwich, but you love the shit sandwich. So I could make the case that probably Japanese people could understand this because, I watch these National Geographic specials about this 90-year-old guy, and he makes the best samurai swords in Japan. And they do this 2-hour special, and he goes up to the mountain and he finds the iron ore, and then he brings it back to his shop and he melts the iron ore, and then he pounds it 10,000 times, and then he puts it back in the thing, and he, tempers it some more. He pounds it another 10,000 times. He makes the handle from this special wood that he found in this forest that only one place has it. And it takes 9 months to make a knife. And I would make the case there's a lot of shit sandwiches in being the best at making a knife or a pot or a kimono or anything like that, right? There's a lot of shit sandwiches. But when you love to make the best knife or the best kimono or the best pot or the best vase, you don't mind. People from the outside may say, wow, what a bunch of shit you have to do. But they love that. So that's the test.
And I also feel like the journey of being great at something, whether it's a sword maker, whether it's an entrepreneur, it's a long one. So to be able to persevere through all of that, exactly like you were saying, you need to have the patience and the drive and I guess the love for the work to be able to get through it.
If being a successful sword maker or kimono maker or entrepreneur were easy, there would be more of them.
Right. I want to make sure we have some time to talk about AI as well. You had mentioned ChatGPT, and you had mentioned Signal as one company, not necessarily in the AI space, but is there a company that you think is in the frontier of AI right now and that's doing it really well?
I'm not an quote AI expert, right? I am merely a user. I may be a power user, but I'm just a user. I'm not the visionary. And I tell you something that every day I say to myself, this is amazing. I don't know how it can do this. Every day I put in the drafts of my manuscripts. I ask it to be my research assistant. I ask it to be my grammar checker. I ask it to be my legal counsel. I mean, I must admit that, I said ChatGPT, but there's ChatGPT, there's Claude, there's Perplexity, there's 10 of these things. I honestly don't know how you develop a loyalty to an LLM. I can tell you the difference between a Windows and a Macintosh. I cannot really tell you the difference between Claude and ChatGPT. I think that is one of the big challenges all those companies are going to face, which is how do we foster brand loyalty to our product when we all seem to be doing a great job? But that's a good question.
Right. When it comes to LLMs, I think, especially as they get better and better, it's just going to be a commodity. So, companies are going to have to think about how they're using that, whether it's distribution, whether it's the application layer. I think it's definitely going to be a fierce battle. I'm curious, for companies like Apple or Canva, how do you think that they're positioned in this new kind of age of AI? Perhaps the fact that you're still at Canva is a sign for one, but
well, Canva for AI is using it for generating images and graphics and text, right? So this is like a natural extension that we're in the business of making you a better communicator. And we used to make you a better communicator just using design templates, in all these hundreds of categories like Instagram backgrounds and 16:9 presentations, resumes, infographics. And now we're helping you generate more of the graphics for those things and the text for those things. So that is just an extension of making you a better communicator and a better designer. Now with Apple, I would make the case that Apple is absolutely in one of the best positions to capitalize on AI, because Apple has all of us using their devices. They know every single character we type in. They know every site. They know everything, right? I mean, they know much better what we're doing than any external LLM. That's good news and bad news. But I would say, and then, at the system level, as opposed to the app level, Apple could integrate AI into everything, right? Whereas ChatGPT, you've got to have the ChatGPT app or the Perplexity app or the Claude app, or you got to, do some special settings so that you give ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity access to your keyboard, or, there's like a lot of stuff, but Apple owns the whole thing. On the other hand, Apple doesn't exactly impress me with their AI yet.
So you think they're positioned well, but perhaps it's still coming. We're yet to see it.
The place that I always scratch my head when I use any Apple product, and I think, oh, Apple should have AI, is a very simple thing, which is whenever I do text messaging and I type the wrong word, I do not understand how ChatGPT can write an entire essay about a very complex topic in 10 seconds. Seriously, in 10 seconds, it could answer some of the most difficult questions. But when I'm in Apple Messages and I type by mistake FIR, the name of the tree, when I meant to type FOR, how can Apple not know that Guy is not talking about a tree in this text message? He means FOR, not FIR. He is not a botanist. I don't understand that. To me, if you had really good AI, this kind of clairvoyance, type ahead, guessing the text is so poorly done. It's amazing to me.
Right. You would think that spell check would have gotten better.
You would think that's so easy, right?
Right. We were talking about how evangelism changed a lot, in the 2 decades, I guess, that you were initially in the business. As a master storyteller, both as, an author of 16 books, you're a podcast host, I think that the art of storytelling is perhaps also changing. There's just so much content out there, whether it's, TikTok, whether it's blogging. And I think AI is going to likely further accelerate this. And we're going to see a ton of AI generated content. How can brands or founders or people who are storytellers kind of cut through the noise? What advice would you have for them?
That is a good question. That said, I do believe that as a brand, if you're trying to use generative AI and storytelling, yes, you can make brilliant TikTok videos and all that kind of stuff, right? But at the end of the day, no matter how good you are with social media, your product has to be good.
Mm.
So you could make the most amazing commercial for your car, but if your car sucks, it ain't going to matter. So I think that it still comes back to, making good sushi, making good kimonos, making good kinako mochi, whatever it is, it's not just the social media. That's just putting lipstick on a pig. So I would say, maybe I could even make the case that with all the bullshit that's going to happen from generative AI, one thing that generative AI cannot generate is a great product.
Mm. You wrote another book, Art of the Start. I think the first one was in 2004, and I believe the second one was in 2015, if I have that correct. In this age of AI, company building is different. Perhaps even the fundraising landscape in BC is different. in this business, I feel like change is the only constant. So things are always different. But if you were to write the 3.0 version, what would be included in that book for founders?
Well, you are very astute, because the reason why I wrote 2.0 is because when I wrote 1.0, there was no such thing as social media. There was barely an internet. And so I wrote 2.0 because there's now an internet, there's social media, because there's crowdfunding. There's a lot of big differences in starting a company. Now, as you point out, in number 3, we have to incorporate AI, because AI is a bigger change than what happened between 1 and 2. So it would be very focused on AI. It's just that I'm so tired. I don't want to write that book.
No, we need number 3, Guy. Do you think that is there a possibility that will be your 17th book?
No.
Okay, maybe that I'm going to hope that means that there's already something else in the works.
Well, yeah, I am. I have another book coming out at the end of this year called Wiser Guy. And Wiser Guy contains all these great stories of my life that have a message and a lesson for people. But even beyond that book is already going to come out in August. The next book I'm working on is a guide to signal. How do you signal to be secure and to be private and to be, not put in jail?
Yeah, a very, very timely pieces. I'm sure it's going to be. To close this off, you were talking about you're still continuously writing, still interviewing all these people, still very active and giving back to the community. What is your ikigai?
Oh, what is my ikigai? I'm kind of obsessed with, I want to empower people. So empowering people is my ikigai. I want to empower people with my podcasting, my writing, my speaking, my investing, my advising. My ikigai is empowering people.
I mean, you're already doing that, but I'm sure you will continue to do that, and I'm sure that will be your legacy. So thank you so much for joining us today. Really, really appreciated the conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I hope you get back to Hawaii. I'm about to go to Hawaii on Sunday. So that's why I had to change this.
I see. Okay. That's a very good excuse to change schedules. I was there last summer, actually. And it was the first time I was back in about a decade. And wow, a lot has changed. I was very surprised.
I'm staying right by Waikiki School. I'm staying on that end of the Waikiki. So.
Oh, very nice.
Enjoy your weekend. Thank you very much for having me as your guest.
No, thank you for coming on. Appreciate it, Guy.
Bye-bye.